Hi, welcome to my build of a 60-inch wingspan Das Ugly Stik. I'm now moving on to the construction of the wings. I've got all of the parts now, or I've mostly got all of the parts completed that are going to make up the wings. I've done my two spruce spars. They still need to be trimmed, but what I've done is, and I've marked them top and bottom. The reason I marked them top and bottom is because I've epoxied them together, and I've sanded the bottom edge and I've sanded the top edge, but I've left the thick epoxy, or not the thick epoxy, but the epoxy where it's kind of bled out between the joints. I've left that. I just thought, well, it probably adds a little bit of extra strength. I may need to just sand it a little bit where the wing ribs go, so they're not, it's not in the way. But what I've done is, this is, I think it's 1/2 inch by 1/4 inch, and then there's this doubler that goes in the central section for the central seven ribs. So I've done those for the top and bottom, and they seem to come out pretty closely, accurate to being the same dihedral, which is good. I was slightly worried I would end up with something not so. I've completed now all of the ribs. These are the ribs for the outer edges where the doubler doesn't go, and so they've got a single cut here, and they just slot on quite nicely. I've also marked all of these ribs with whether it's the top and the type of rib. So I put a T for top, because the ribs are not symmetrical. So if I mark them now, then when I'm putting it together, there won't be any mistakes. I've still got the central 7 ribs here, which need to have the double thickness cut out. But I didn't want to do that until I'd got these spars finished, so I knew the exact width. I didn't want to cut them out and then find I'd cut too much. If you're interested in seeing how I created these identical ribs, 17 in total I believe, then have a look in the description below this video, and there'll be a link to a video I did just showing how I make identical ribs. It's a simple process that lots of people use. It's not my own thinking, if you like. But anyway, I've done a video, and have a look at that if you're interested. I've cut out the wing tips. I wasn't sure when I cut these out whether they should finish here or full length, because what we've got along the bottom of this is a cut out of the wings off the plan, and along the bottom we have these trailing edges that go on. Now the wing tips at that far end come down, and I wasn't sure whether they actually came inside these two pieces that make up the trailing edge, but I've since realised actually they don't. This doesn't. It just butts up against it, so that's going to need to be trimmed a little bit, 50mm off there. So, and I've got the ailerons, nice big ailerons ready to go on. One thing I haven't cut out yet is the false ribs. There's 14 of these. I didn't want to do these until I knew exactly what size. I didn't want to cut out this template, make all the ribs, and then find out actually they're not quite right. As with all plan builds, you need to check and double check and check, because somebody's not only drawn them out, and I've seen that there's the odd error, like with one of the formers I mentioned in the fuselage, but then they've scanned them, which will introduce size errors, and then my printer's printed them, which again could stretch them or shrink them slightly. So you have to check and double check and recheck. So that's why I haven't done those. But I think I'm at the point now where I can't really do anything else unless I start to build this wing up. Just quickly, in the manual that comes with this, there's a link in the description. They suggest you make a V board, the correct dihedral hinged in the middle, and build both wings together. I'm not going to do that. I don't really want the hassle and the expense of building a board to do it. So I'm going to set off and do the one wing first. So yeah, it's going to do the one wing first and get that completely finished, or as finished as I can do, and then I'm going to tilt it down and I'm going to build this wing. But what I will do is make a lot of, or give a lot of thought to this end to make sure that I haven't introduced any twists or I don't know, any problems. I mean, essentially with these ribs, this is the top. This back rear lower edge from the spar right the way through to these trailing edges here is completely flat. So when I build it, that's nice. I can put that on there. This will be completely flat. It's not at the moment because it's lifted up. There's a cutting mat under here, but that's completely flat. So I know that when I lift this up, as long as I make sure that this is completely parallel with the building board at this end, it should be okay, that end. That's the theory. I think there'll be a lot of thinking and scratching of heads, or one head, just to make sure that that is correct. But yeah, so the next step is I'm going to get on now and start to build this up, glue it together, and see how that goes. I've just spent some time mocking this up and putting it all together. I just wanted to make sure that everything would fit nice. I've cut these wider slots here for these more central ribs where you've got the doubler, and I just wanted to make sure there was no tension, there wasn't any twisting, and it all sits fairly steady. It doesn't need weighting down or anything to try and get it straight. So I'm quite pleased with that. I've done both sides as far as the ribs and the cutting these slots for the doubler, but I haven't. I'm not going to glue these, as I said. First, I'm just going to do this one side, and then I'm going to sit it up and do the other side. And this all looks in line as well. This end. There doesn't look to be any tension, it seems all fairly straight, so I think it's going to be okay. I kind of had a thought earlier. I was talking about making these, in the previous clip I talked about making these 14 false ribs for the front here and how I was going to wait until I'd got this ready to make sure they fitted, and then I thought, what are you doing? I've got this template here, and obviously if the false ribs will fit here, then they're going to fit the rest of it because they're going to be identical to the ribs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that onto my scrap pile for another day, and I'm going to put a secondary hole in here. So there's two holes, and I'm going to just put pieces of balsa in the front end and shape them and cut the sections, and then they'll be identical to the rest of the ribs. Don't know why I didn't think of that earlier. Glad I did think of it. So that's going to be the next job, is to make those false ribs, and then I'm going to start gluing this together. One thing that I have learned is don't trust the lines on the plans are straight. So when you actually look at these, this spar, it is actually straight, or at least the bottom is. Let's just check. Yeah, that is dead straight, which is great. But when you look on the plan, the line is, it's in line here, but then it kind of bows out a little bit and then back in here. So, you know, you need to check, or I need to check and not accept the plans, which I've talked about earlier. And also when I cut these leading and trailing edges, I just simply these sheets of balsa are 100mm wide, and I simply divided it down the middle, so these are 50mm wide. And as I was setting them out, I just checked that the edge was straight, and my balsa had a slight warp in it, so I hadn't got a straight edge. So that's something else not to trust. The balsa has got a straight edge, and that straight edge front I'm going to make sure goes here, so that it keeps the wings nice and straight. And if there is any wave, I'm not sure if there is on that back side, yes there is a little bit, it's not a problem because that's going to be sanded and straightened up once I've got the wing done. So, but making sure this front edge here of the trailing edge sheets is straight is important. And one final thing, in the plans it talks about cutting through here halfway or 3/4 of the way and then propping this up so that it, when these are finished, you pinch them together. I'm not going to do that because if I put any pressure under this edge here, it starts lifting up the ribs, and I'm worried what that will do to the overall shape. So I'm going to put the slice in, and then I will just pinch these together as needed. Well, this is all nicely glued up now, and I'm happy it's all square and flat and there's no movement. I've got the front two spars in, and I've got all of the false ribs in place, and that's lovely and level now. I'm quite pleased with that. Just thinking ahead to the next stage, I've got this top trailing edge to go on, and the sheeting, but it occurred to me that if I just put it on as per plan, there's nothing to hold the hinges. They'll just slip through the gap, and they could even be just floating in thin air and be glued on with just an edge here. I may have difficulty if I want to try and get epoxy in there, because I'm going to put the hinges on after the wing is covered, so I'm not going to have access to, like this. So what I've done is I've cut some wedge shaped blocks, and I've marked out where the hinges are going to go, and I'm going to glue those in place, and then when this is in place there, as long as I can remember where the blocks are, I can actually cut into those blocks, and that will give me a lot more purchase. These blocks are probably a little bit too big still. I'll probably just trim them down and make them a little bit smaller. I mean, there's no weight to them, they're just very light balsa, so I think that will just give a better hold. And to be honest, because of the construction of this, I will probably drill through from the bottom side and not break the top covering, and just put a cocktail stick in and CA that as well, just for double safety. I've now flipped the wing over, and I'm going to start gluing the left side. I've spent a lot of time making sure that this is all square, and I'll just tell you some of the things I've done. As we know, this bottom edge here is flat, and that sits flat on the board. So I've built a couple of lifts here which are the same size, and that just holds this rib here perfectly parallel with the building board. So we know that that is perfectly parallel there, and all these ribs along here are perfectly parallel on the building board. I did have a little bit of an issue at first where these ribs were just lifting up a bit, and I couldn't work out what it was, and then I realised that this trailing edge, the underpiece on the sheeting, was just a little bit too proud. So I got one of my sanding blocks, and I lifted this up and just sanded it until that just sat nicely. And just that being a little bit too long and a bit too proud, just lifted the whole lot up and threw it slightly out of skew. What else I've also done is I've put a piece of uniform balsa under here, which holds that rib. You can see there's no movement in that rib, parallel again with the board, because this rib is the first rib of the right hand wing, so that's just lifted off. I think that's 1/4 inch balsa, so it's just a 1/4 inch off, and I've just put a weight on that just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere before I start gluing it. Again, don't trust the lines on your plans. I had this spar at first on the left side I'm going to do now. I had that lined up with the plan, and I eyed it up from the end, and I thought, I'm not sure that's straight. And I've got this metre long ruler, and it wasn't. It was just kicked over slightly because the lines on the plan are slightly crooked or slightly bent. So I've actually lined this metre ruler up with this central spar, and that is dead straight now, that central spar. I just had to move it slightly over a bit. You probably can't see on the plan here, but the bottom spar is just about, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch, 3/16, sort of that side of what's shown on the plan. I mean, it could be that I've actually put it on slightly crooked this side. But anyway, so measuring this up, or using a metre straight edge like that is fantastic. I've also done that with the front edge. So hopefully I really am there now and ready to and start gluing this, but it's taken me quite a bit of time to get this right. It's just one of these things that once you've glued it, if it's not right, you're screwed. So it's worth spending, for me anyway, it's worth spending the time to make sure I've got it right. So I'm going to get on and glue that now, and it'll be nice to see it finished and hopefully square. Right. Well, I've now got both sides of the wing completed, or at least the kind of the main frame completed. I still need to do the wingtips and pinch down these ends. I'm going to leave that right till the very end. I've still got the central fixings. If you remember on the plans, it was elastic bands and dowels, which I really don't want to do. So I'm going to have it locking in at the front and bolting at the back. I've also done some shear webs as well. These are here ready to be glued in, I just haven't done it yet, and I've numbered those 1, 2, and oh, it's going to go on the other side, sorry, on the front edge, because of this doubler here. These have the grain running vertically, so it's much stronger that way. And I'm just going to do them on the plans. It doesn't show any shear webbing at all, but I just wanted to put something on just to give those wings a bit of strength. So I'm putting it on the first 3 on either side. Like I say, I've got these cut and labelled, and I've also done a plywood brace in the middle, which will go in, and just get these off here. So that brace will go in the middle, and then I've cut the rib, and this will just go in the back here like that, and I've got the front of that rib to go in the front. I just think again this will give it just that little bit more strength. But first, what I need to do before I'm going to do any of this is make sure the wings are square and true. First thing I did is place them on the fuselage and make sure they sit comfortably, which they do, nice and square, no big gaps, and then measuring the tips. I did find that this tip was a little bit too high, and I've had to plane off some of the material, sand off some of the material on this side, and I've checked my bench is level, and then I've got this so that it's level. And what I did is I put a little bit of plastic around part of my sanding stick and then just sanded that side like that. And so the plastic won't take anything off that side, but I'm taking it off this side. And if you remember, the underside of the ribs is flat, so this should be completely flat up to, I'll put a marker there, up there. So I can sand it like that as well if I want. But this is a good way to do it for me because it keeps it square. I've had to shave a little bit off the front just with a scalpel as well. But that's all sitting nicely level now, or at least level that way by measuring the wingtips, which is good. I need to think about the angle of incidence as well and how the wing actually sits front to back. Looking at the plans that I've got on the wall over there, there is no angle of incidence, or at least it's a couple of millimetres higher at the front. The bottom of the fuselage is parallel with the tailplane. It's just a continuous straight line through, and measuring from the bottom of the fuselage to the centre line, front and back on the plans, it's a couple of millimetres higher at the front, so there's a very slight positive angle of incidence. The plans say nothing, or the manual doesn't give any indication. I suspect it's probably a zero angle of incidence, but what I've done is because I don't have an angle of incidence meter or incidence meter, so we're using a low-tech approach here. I've put a pin in the trailing edge and the leading edge on all four corners, and I'm mounting this on here nicely and squarely where I think it ought to go, and then I've measured to the pin both sides to get that equal, but also with the front to make sure that I have a very, very slightly positive angle of incidence. It's just, I think it's about 2 mil higher on the front than it is on the back. Like I say, I mean that's more or less reproducing what's on the plans. Unfortunately, there's nothing on the plans to tell me what it should be, so I think that will probably be fine. And if not, I'll have to adjust it later. It'd be nice if that information was there, to be honest. It would just give you a little bit more confidence.